The mining colony of New Kepler sat like a small jewel against the dark surface of the planet below. Jake Morrison stood at the observation deck of the main administrative building and watched the morning shift workers heading toward the extraction sites. Everything looked normal from up here, but Jake knew better. The readings on his tablet told a different story entirely. 3 days ago, reactor number 7 had suffered what the engineers called a minor containment breach. Minor was a relative term when dealing with fusion reactors. The leak had been sealed within hours, but the damage was already done. Radioactive particles had contaminated the entire medical storage facility that sat directly adjacent to the reactor complex. Lisa Carter walked up behind him, her footsteps echoing in the empty observation area. She was the colony's chief medical officer, and Jake could tell from her expression that the news wasn't getting any better. "How bad is it this time?" Jake asked without turning around. Lisa pulled up her own tablet and swiped through several screens of data. "We lost 90% of our pharmaceutical supplies. The radiation readings in Storage Bay 12 are still climbing. We can't salvage anything from that section." Jake finally turned to face her. Lisa looked tired. She had been working around the clock since the accident happened, trying to figure out what medicines they could save and what they would need to replace. The colony housed 15,000 people from 6 different species. Each species had different medical needs and different reactions to various treatments. "What about the emergency reserves?" Jake asked. "That's the problem. The emergency supplies were stored in the same facility. Standard Federation protocol called for centralized medical storage to improve efficiency. Nobody planned for a reactor leak contaminating the entire medical wing." Jake walked over to the communications console that sat in the corner of the observation deck. The device looked simple enough, but it connected New Kepler to the vast network of Federation worlds and colonies scattered across this sector of space. He had used it many times before to request supplies or report production numbers to the mining consortium back on the Federation homeworld. "We need to send a distress call," Jake said. "How long can we stretch what we have left?" Lisa checked her tablet again. "Maybe 2 weeks if nothing goes wrong." "But Jake, something is already going wrong. We're seeing the first cases of what looks like radiation poisoning among the workers who were near the reactor during the leak. Plus, we've got 3 cases of Zolonian flu in Sector 9, and we don't have enough antiviral medication to treat them properly." The Zolonians were one of the alien species that worked in the colony. They were excellent miners with natural abilities that made them perfect for deep excavation work. But they were also susceptible to respiratory infections that could spread quickly through their population if not treated immediately. Jake activated the communication system and waited for the connection to establish. The nearest Federation outpost was 6 days away by standard transport. A supply ship could make the journey in 4 days if they pushed their engines, but it would still take time to load the necessary medical supplies and coordinate the delivery. "This is New Kepler Colony calling Federation Outpost Gamma 7. Jake spoke into the transmitter. "We have a medical emergency and require immediate assistance." The response came back after a few minutes of delay. "New Kepler Colony, this is Commander Veltar at Outpost Gamma 7. Please state the nature of your emergency." Jake looked at Lisa before responding. "We've had a reactor accident that contaminated our entire medical supply storage. We have 15,000 colonists, and we're down to less than 10% of our normal pharmaceutical inventory. We need emergency medical supplies for multiple species including humans, Solonians, Kratari, and Vexians." There was a longer pause this time. Jake could imagine Commander Veltar checking databases and calculating what supplies would be needed. The Federation was efficient at handling these kinds of routine supply issues. They had protocols and procedures for everything. "New Kepler Colony, we understand your situation. We will prepare a standard emergency medical supply package and dispatch it on the next available transport. Estimated arrival time is 4 days. The package will include basic medications for all listed species. Please confirm your current population numbers and any specific urgent medical needs." Lisa stepped forward and took the microphone from Jake. Commander Veltar, this is Dr. Lisa Carter, Chief Medical Officer for New Kepler. We have immediate cases of radiation exposure and an outbreak of Zolonian flu that's beginning to spread. We need not just basic supplies, but advanced treatment options and quarantine equipment. Understood, Dr. Carter. We will include radiation treatment protocols and additional antiviral medications in the supply package. Our medical database indicates this should be sufficient for your colony size. Please stand by for further instructions on quarantine procedures. Jake felt some relief hearing that help was on the way, but 4 days seemed like a long time when people were already getting sick. He activated a secondary communication channel, one that connected directly to Earth's colonial administration network. New Kepler was technically a joint operation between the Federation and human colonial interests, which meant they could request assistance from either organization. This is New Kepler Colony requesting emergency assistance from Earth. Colonial Command, Jake transmitted. We have a critical medical situation affecting 15,000 colonists of multiple species. Our medical supplies have been contaminated by a reactor accident and we need immediate support. The response came back much faster than the Federation. The reply had, New Kepler Colony, this is Admiral Ben Tucker at Earth Colonial Defense Network. We're reading your transmission and we're already pulling up your colony specifications. Tell us exactly what happened and what you need. Jake explained the situation again, but this time he found himself going into much more detail. Admiral Tucker asked specific questions about the reactor type, the contamination levels, the affected population, and the current medical cases. The conversation went on for nearly 20 minutes as the Admiral gathered information. New Kepler Colony, we're going to get you help, Admiral Tucker out. Lisa looked at Jake with a puzzled expression. That was different from the Federation response. He didn't tell us what they were sending or when it would arrive. Jake shrugged. Maybe they need more time to coordinate with the Federation supply ship. Both organizations will probably send supplies and coordinate the delivery. What Jake didn't know was that Admiral Tucker had immediately transferred the call to the 3rd Colonial Fleet and declared a humanitarian emergency. On Earth, military planners were already calculating the fastest route to New Kepler and determining what resources would be needed not just to solve the immediate medical crisis, but to prevent any similar emergency from happening again. The Federation was preparing a single transport ship with standard medical supplies. Earth was preparing for war against an invisible enemy that threatened 15,000 lives. The difference in approach would become clear very soon. Admiral Ben Tucker stood in the command center of Earth's colonial defense network and stared at the massive displays showing ship positions across human space. The distress call from New Kepler had reached him less than an hour ago, but already the entire 3rd Colonial Fleet was receiving mobilization orders. Captain Helen Brooks was in her quarters aboard the USS Defender when the emergency alert came through her personal communicator. She had been reviewing supply reports from their last mission, but those documents were quickly forgotten as she read the priority message from Admiral Tucker. 15,000 lives in danger. Medical emergency. Deploy immediately. Helen reached her command bridge in less than 5 minutes and found her crew already at their stations. The bridge of the Defender hummed with activity as officers pulled up star charts and began calculating jump routes to the New Kepler system. What's our current fleet status? Helen asked her executive officer, Commander Patricia Hill. Patricia consulted her tablet and began reading off numbers. We have 12 heavy cruisers ready for immediate deployment. The medical frigates Mercy, Hope, Salvation, Guardian, Healer, and Rescue are all fully stocked and can launch within 2 hours. Science vessels Darwin, Newton, Curie, and Pasteur are completing their supply loads now. Helen nodded and moved to the main tactical display. What about the supply haulers? 8 ships loaded and ready. The Chicago, Detroit, Boston, Miami, Denver, Phoenix, Seattle, and Portland are carrying enough provisions for 50,000 people for 6 months. Chief Supply Officer Tony Walsh supervised the loading personally. The scale of the response was already massive, but Helen knew they weren't finished yet. Admiral Tucker had made it clear that this was not going to be a minimal response mission. When humans received a distress call, they prepared for every possible scenario and then prepared for scenarios beyond that. Add the colony ships Atlas and Titan to the fleet roster, Helen ordered. If the contamination is worse than reported, we might need to evacuate the entire colony and establish temporary housing. Commander Patricia Hill looked surprised. Captain, the colony ships are designed for establishing new settlements. Each one carries complete terraforming equipment and habitat construction materials. Exactly. If we need to relocate 15,000 people quickly, we'll need somewhere to put them. Better to have the capability and not need it than need it and not have it. The philosophy behind human emergency response had developed over centuries of disasters on Earth. Humans had learned the hard way that small problems could become big problems very quickly. And big problems could become catastrophic problems if you didn't have enough resources to handle them properly. Dr. Amy Collins was aboard the medical frigate Mercy when she received her briefing about the new Kepler situation. As Chief Medical Officer for the Third Fleet, she would be responsible for coordinating the medical response to the crisis. But as she read through the reports, she realized that they were preparing for much more than just treating radiation. Poisoning and alien flu. We're not just bringing medicine, Amy said to her assistant, Dr. Kevin Ross. We're bringing an entire medical infrastructure. The medical frigates carried more than just drugs and surgical equipment. Each ship had complete genetic sequencing laboratories, xenobiology research facilities, and manufacturing capabilities for producing specialized medications. If the colonists needed a treatment that didn't exist yet, the fleet could invent it, test it, and produce it on site. The Federation response will probably be a single transport ship with standard medical supplies, Dr. Ross observed. They'll treat the immediate symptoms and call it solved. Amy shook her head. That's not how humans do things. We're going to find out why this accident happened, how to prevent it from happening again, and what other potential problems the colony might face in the future. Then we're going to solve all of those problems at once. Meanwhile, on Federation, Outpost Gamma 7, Commander Veltar was having a very different conversation with his logistics officer. They had prepared a standard emergency medical package for New Kepler and loaded it aboard the transport ship Gentle Current. The ship would arrive at New Kepler in 4 days and deliver the requested supplies. This should be sufficient for their needs, Veltar told his staff. The database indicates that our standard package contains enough medication to treat radiation, exposure for up to 1,000 individuals, and enough antiviral drugs to stop a flu outbreak in its early stages. What Commander Veltar didn't know was that human intelligence networks were already monitoring Federation communications and tracking the Gentle Current's departure. Admiral Tucker wanted to know exactly what resources the Federation was sending, so he could plan accordingly. One transport ship, Admiral Tucker said to his staff. They're sending one ship with basic supplies to handle a crisis affecting 15,000 people. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. The Federation saw this as a routine supply delivery that could be handled with standard procedures and minimal resources. Humans saw it as a humanitarian crisis that required overwhelming force and comprehensive solutions. Captain Helen Brooks received her final mission briefing as the Third Fleet prepared to depart Earth orbit. The fleet now consisted of 46 ships carrying enough resources to establish a new colony, defend it against attack, and provide medical care for a population 10 times larger than New Kepler's current size. Our mission is simple, Admiral Tucker explained to the assembled fleet commanders via secure communication link. We are going to make sure that no one dies on New Kepler, that this kind of accident never happens again, and that the colony becomes the safest place to live in that entire sector of space. The alien observers stationed on Earth watched in amazement as the massive human fleet departed. Federation Liaison Officer Kreikta immediately sent a message to his superiors warning them about the human military deployment. To alien eyes, it looked like humanity was launching an invasion force. This is completely disproportionate, Kreikta reported. They are sending enough ships to conquer an entire star system just to deliver medical supplies to a single colony. But the humans saw it differently. They weren't sending an invasion force. They were sending a rescue mission that happened to be large enough to handle any possible complication that might arise. If New Kepler needed evacuation, they could evacuate it. If the medical crisis was worse than reported, they could handle it. If there were other hidden problems waiting to be discovered, they would solve those too. The human fleet jumped to hyperspace with a flash of brilliant light that could be seen from the surface of Earth, 46 ships carrying the hopes and determination of an entire species were now racing toward New Kepler at maximum speed. They would arrive in 3 days. A full day ahead of the Federation transport ship, the aliens would soon learn that when humans promised help, they didn't just send what you asked for. They sent everything you might possibly need, and then sent more just to be safe. The human fleet moved through Federation space like a massive storm front approaching a peaceful coastline. Captain Helen Brooks stood on the bridge of the USS Defender and watched the tactical display showing their formation. 46 ships, traveling in perfect coordination toward New Kepler, but their passage was causing reactions throughout the sector that no one had anticipated. Communications Officer Mary Johnson turned from her station with a concerned expression. "Captain, we're receiving multiple hails from Federation ships and outposts. They're asking about our intentions and requesting flight plans." Helen walked over to Mary's station and looked at the incoming messages. There were dozens of them, all expressing various levels of concern about the human fleet's movement through Federation territory. Some were polite inquiries about their destination, while others bordered on demands for immediate explanations. "Put me through to Federation." "Command," Helen ordered. "Let's clear this up before it becomes a bigger problem." The main screen flickered and showed the face of Admiral LeaveHFY, a Kratari officer who served as regional commander for this sector of Federation space. His reptilian features showed obvious concern as he looked at the human formation. "Captain Brooks, I am receiving reports of a massive human military deployment moving through our territory without proper authorization. Please explain your mission and intentions immediately." Helen remained calm despite the accusatory tone. "Admiral LeaveHFY, we are responding to a humanitarian emergency at New Kepler Colony. We received a distress call reporting medical supply contamination and potential loss of life among 15,000 colonists." Admiral LeaveHFY's expression became even more confused. "Captain, our records show that Outpost Gamma 7 has already dispatched appropriate medical supplies to address this situation. Why are you deploying what appears to be an invasion fleet for a simple supply delivery? This is not an invasion fleet, Admiral. This is a humanitarian response force equipped to handle any medical emergency that might arise. We believe in being prepared for all possible scenarios." The conversation continued for several more minutes with Admiral LeaveHFY, struggling to understand why humans would send such massive resources to solve what seemed like a routine problem. From his perspective, the Federation transport ship Gentle Current carried more than enough supplies to handle the situation at New Kepler, while Captain Brooks dealt with Federation concerns. Other problems were developing throughout the sector. General Crixenol of the Hegemony Defense Force was studying intelligence reports about human fleet movements from his command ship in a neighboring system. "This deployment pattern makes no sense for a humanitarian mission," General Crixenol told his staff officers. 46 ships including heavy cruisers and colony vessels. They could establish a permanent military base with this kind of force? The Hegemony had been watching human expansion into this region with growing concern. Humans had a reputation for aggressive territorial expansion and military solutions to political problems. To alien eyes, this fleet looked like the first phase of a human invasion. General Crixenol ordered his own ships to increase alert status and began moving defensive forces toward the border with human territory. Other alien governments received similar intelligence reports and started making their own military preparations. The sector was becoming increasingly tense as various species tried to figure out what the humans were really planning. Meanwhile, aboard the human fleet, Navigator Tony Walsh was tracking their progress toward New Kepler and monitoring the reactions of other ships in the area. He noticed that civilian merchant vessels were changing course to avoid the human formation, and several military patrols had appeared on long-range sensors. "Captain, we're causing quite a stir out here," Tony reported. "I'm seeing increased military activity from at least 3 different species, and the normal shipping traffic has basically stopped moving." Captain Brooks understood the problem but wasn't willing to slow down or reduce their response just to make other species more comfortable. Every hour of delay meant more potential casualties at New Kepler Colony. The human approach to emergencies didn't include compromising the mission to avoid hurt feelings. "Maintain course and speed," Helen ordered. "Send a general broadcast explaining our humanitarian mission to any ships or stations that request information. But we're not changing our plans." Dr. Amy Collins was monitoring the situation from her medical command center aboard the frigate. Mercy, she could see the political complications developing, but her focus remained on the medical emergency waiting for them at New Kepler. Her staff was preparing not just to treat the immediate crisis, but to establish long-term medical infrastructure for the colony. "The Federation transport will arrive about 18 hours after we do," Dr. Collins told her team. "By the time they get there, we'll already have field hospitals operational and treatment protocols established for all affected colonists." Dr. Kevin Ross looked up from his preparation checklist. "The Federation crew is going to be surprised when they arrive to find a complete medical complex already in operation." Amy smiled at that thought. "Let them be surprised. Our job is to save lives, not to meet other people's expectations about appropriate response levels." The human fleet was now 12 hours away from New Kepler, but the political situation in the sector was becoming more complicated by the hour. Federation Council Speaker Zulmak had called an emergency session to discuss the human deployment, and representatives from multiple species were demanding explanations. Ambassador Paul Davis found himself in the uncomfortable position of trying to explain human emergency response philosophy to a room full of aliens who considered the deployment excessive and potentially threatening. "Honored representatives," Ambassador Davis addressed the council, "humans approach humanitarian crises with the understanding that underpreparation leads to preventable deaths. We would rather bring too much help than not enough help." Speaker Zulmak gestured with his 4 arms in a display of frustration. "Ambassador Davis, your government has deployed enough military force to conquer a medium-sized star system. How is this proportionate to delivering medical supplies to a single colony?" Paul had been through similar conversations before when explaining human policies to alien governments. "Speaker Zulmak, we don't see this as military force. We see this as medical infrastructure, evacuation capability, emergency construction resources, and backup systems for every critical function that the colony might need." The explanation didn't seem to satisfy most of the council members, who continued to view the human response as unnecessarily aggressive and wasteful. They couldn't understand why any species would commit such massive resources to solve what seemed like a simple logistics problem, but the humans weren't thinking about logistics or politics or resource efficiency. They were thinking about 15,000 people who might die if the response wasn't adequate. Every ship in the fleet served a specific purpose in ensuring that no possible complication could prevent a successful rescue operation. As the fleet approached the New Kepler system, Captain Brooks prepared her crews for what would either be a routine medical emergency or a complex evacuation operation. They were ready for both possibilities and several others that hadn't been mentioned yet. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the New Kepler system with a brilliant flash of energy that lit up sensor screens across 3 neighboring star systems. Captain Helen Brooks watched her tactical display as 46 ships took their assigned positions around the mining colony's planet. In the distance, she could see the small Federation transport ship Gentle Current already in orbit. Jake Morrison was in the colony's main communications center when the massive fleet appeared on their sensors. He had been expecting a supply ship, or maybe 2 vessels at most. Instead, His screen showed enough firepower to level a planet and enough cargo capacity to evacuate his entire population twice over. "Lisa, you need to see this," Jake called to Dr. Carter, who was checking on patients in the makeshift medical ward. They had set up in the colony's main cafeteria. Lisa hurried to the communications center and stared at the sensor display in amazement. "How many ships is that?" she asked. 46 ships according to the computer," Jake replied. "The largest one is identifying itself as the USS Defender with Captain Helen Brooks commanding." Before either of them could say anything else, the communication system activated with an incoming message from the human fleet. "New Kepler Colony. This is Captain Brooks of the 3rd Colonial Fleet. We received your distress call and we're here to provide assistance. Please prepare to receive medical teams and emergency supplies. We'll have field hospitals operational within 6 hours." Jake looked at Lisa with confusion. "Field hospitals? We asked for medical supplies, not a complete medical infrastructure." Lisa activated the transmitter. "Captain Brooks, this is Dr. Lisa Carter, Chief Medical Officer for New Kepler. We appreciate your response, but we weren't expecting such a large deployment. The Federation has already sent a supply ship with basic medicines." Captain Brooks' voice came back immediately. "Dr. Carter, we're aware of the Federation response. However, our protocols require comprehensive emergency support for any crisis involving potential loss of life. We're not just here to deliver supplies. We're here to solve the problem completely." Within 2 hours, the human response had transformed New Kepler from a struggling mining colony into the most medically advanced facility in the sector. 3 orbital medical stations had been deployed and were already receiving patients from the surface. Atmospheric processors were working to clean the contaminated air around the reactor complex. A planetary shield grid was being installed to prevent future contamination incidents. Dr. Amy Collins beamed down to the colony surface with her medical team and immediately began setting up treatment protocols for every colonist who had been exposed to radiation. But she wasn't just treating the immediate symptoms. Her team was conducting complete genetic scans to identify potential long-term health effects and developing personalized treatment plans for each individual. Mining, Foreman Carl White watched in amazement as human engineers began installing backup power systems throughout the colony. "We didn't ask for new power systems," he told engineer Rachel Bell, who was supervising the installation. "No, but your current power grid has 17 critical failure points that could shut down life support if they malfunction," Rachel replied while checking her tablet. "We're installing redundant systems so that kind of failure becomes impossible." The approach was typical of human emergency response. They didn't just solve the immediate problem, they identified every related problem that could occur and solve those too. Chief Engineer Linda Thompson found herself working alongside human specialists who were upgrading systems she hadn't even known needed upgrading. Meanwhile, Commander Veltar aboard the Federation transport ship Gentle Current was trying to understand what he was seeing. His ship had arrived to find the human fleet already in position and working with military precision to address every aspect of the colony's situation. "This is completely unnecessary," Veltar told his medical officer, Dr. Trenvik. "We brought enough supplies to handle the radiation exposure and the flu outbreak. The situation was well within normal parameters for a standard emergency response." Dr. Trenvik was reviewing the reports from the human medical teams on the surface. "Commander, they're not just treating the immediate medical issues. They're conducting comprehensive health assessments for the entire population and establishing permanent medical monitoring systems." Veltar couldn't understand the human methodology. From his perspective, they were wasting enormous resources on a problem that could be solved with basic medical supplies and standard treatment protocols. The Federation approach was efficient and cost-effective. The human approach seemed wasteful and excessive, but down on the colony surface, the results of the human approach were already becoming obvious. Colony Security Chief Matt Rodriguez had been dealing with growing panic among the colonists as more people became sick and medical supplies ran low. Within hours of the human arrival, the panic had been replaced by relief and confidence. "The humans didn't just bring medicine, Matt. reported to Jake Morrison. They brought hope. People aren't afraid anymore because they can see that everything is being taken care of. Dr. Collins established a medical command center in the colony's main administrative building and began coordinating treatment for all 15,000 colonists. Her team wasn't just addressing current medical issues. They were implementing preventive care programs, establishing genetic counseling services, and creating long-term health monitoring systems. We're treating colonists who didn't even know they had health problems, Dr. Collins explained to Dr. Carter. The Zelonian workers have been suffering from a mineral deficiency that was affecting their breathing, but they thought it was normal. The Krateri population has early signs of bone density loss from the lower gravity, but no one was monitoring for it. The comprehensive approach extended beyond medical care. Supply Coordinator Jennifer Martinez was working with colony communications. Officer Steve Clark to establish emergency supply caches throughout the colony. If another crisis occurred, they would have backup supplies, backup communication systems, and backup evacuation routes already in place. Admiral Ben Tucker arrived personally aboard his flagship 12 hours after the initial fleet deployment. He wanted to oversee the establishment of a permanent rapid response depot in the new Kepler system. Commander Patricia Hill was assigned to command the depot, which would remain in the system indefinitely to handle any future emergencies. We're not just solving this crisis, Admiral Tucker explained to the assembled colony leadership. We're making sure this kind of crisis never happens again and that you're prepared for any other crisis that might occur. Jake Morrison was beginning to understand the difference between Federation and human approaches to emergency response. The Federation had sent enough supplies to treat the immediate symptoms and stabilize the situation. The humans had sent enough resources to eliminate the problem entirely and prevent similar problems from occurring in the future. "You didn't just save our colony," Jake told Captain Brooks during a meeting in the colony's main conference room. "You transformed it into something much better than it was before." Captain Brooks smiled at the comment. "That's what humans do, Administrator Morrison. When someone calls for help, we don't just respond to the crisis. We eliminate the conditions that created the crisis in the first place." Director Quanful of the Federation Crisis Analysis Department arrived at New Kepler 3 weeks after the human fleet deployment. His mission was to study and understand the human response methodology for the Federation Council. What he found completely changed his understanding of emergency management. Quanful's first stop was the orbital medical station that the humans had constructed above the colony. The station was larger than many planetary hospitals and equipped with technology that surpassed anything the Federation had deployed in this sector. Dr. Amy Collins gave him a personal tour of the facilities. "This station can handle medical emergencies for a population of 100,000 people," Dr. Collins explained as they walked through the genetics laboratory. "We built it to serve not just New Kepler, but any colony in this region that might need advanced medical care." Quanful examined the equipment around him. "Dr. Collins, this facility represents a massive investment in resources. The Federation calculated that basic medical supplies would have been sufficient to address the original crisis." Dr. Collins paused at a workstation where technicians were analyzing blood samples from the new Kepler colonists. "Director Quanful, let me show you something interesting. When we arrived, we were treating radiation poisoning and Zelonian flu, but our comprehensive medical scans revealed 47 other health issues that were affecting the colonists." She pulled up a data display showing medical statistics from the colony. The Kratari workers were developing respiratory problems from mining dust exposure. The Vexian population had nutritional deficiencies that would have caused serious illness. Within 6 months, 3 human colonists had early-stage cancers that hadn't been detected yet. Quanful studied the data with growing amazement. "You discovered all of this while responding to the original emergency." "That's the point," Dr. Collins replied. "When humans respond to a crisis, we don't just treat the obvious symptoms. We look for underlying problems that might cause future crises. It's more efficient to solve everything at once than to keep coming back for separate emergencies." Down on the colony surface, Quanful interviewed colony administrator Jake Morrison about the human response. Jake took him on a tour of the upgraded facilities that the human engineers had installed throughout New Kepler. Before the humans arrived, we had one backup power generator for the entire colony, Jake explained as they walked through the new power distribution center. Now we have 17 independent power sources and enough redundancy to keep the colony running even if 15 of them fail simultaneously. Quanful looked at the sophisticated control systems that monitored every aspect of the colony's infrastructure. This seems like excessive preparation for unlikely failure scenarios. Jake activated a display showing the colony system status. That's what I thought too, until engineer Rachel Bell showed me the failure analysis. Our original power grid had a 63% chance of complete failure within the next 5 years. The new system has less than a 1% chance of failure over the next 50 years. The tour continued through the upgraded water processing facilities, the new atmospheric monitoring systems, and the emergency evacuation procedures that had been installed throughout the colony. Every system had been designed with multiple layers of redundancy and backup options. Security Chief Matt Rodriguez explained the new emergency protocols to Quanful. The humans didn't just solve our medical crisis. They analyzed every possible emergency that could affect the colony and created response plans for all of them. We're now prepared for reactor accidents, natural disasters, external attacks, supply shortages, and population evacuation. Quanful was beginning to understand that the human approach wasn't wasteful or excessive. It was comprehensive planning, based on a fundamentally different philosophy about emergency preparedness. The Federation responded to crises as they occurred. Humans tried to prevent crises from occurring in the first place. Commander Veltar of the Federation transport ship Gentle Current had remained in the new Kepler system to observe the human operations. His official mission was to deliver medical supplies, but that task had become irrelevant within hours of the human fleet's arrival. Now he was trying to understand how the human methods could be applied to Federation emergency response. The Federation medical package we delivered would have stabilized the immediate crisis. Veltar reported to his superiors. The human response eliminated the crisis entirely and created capabilities that exceed anything we have in this entire sector. Dr. Trenvik had been working alongside the human medical teams and learning their diagnostic procedures. Commander, the human medical protocols are remarkably thorough. They're not just treating sick patients. They're identifying health risks before they become serious problems. Xenobiologist Trelvin from the Federation Science Council interviewed Dr. Collins about human medical philosophy. Dr. Collins, your species seems to approach medical care with an assumption that prevention is more important than treatment. Dr. Collins was reviewing patient files in her office aboard the orbital medical station. That's correct, Dr. Trelvin. We've learned that it's easier to prevent a disease than to cure it, easier to prevent an accident than to respond to it, and easier to prevent a crisis than to manage it. The conversation continued for several hours as Dr. Collins explained how human medical practice had evolved from reactive treatment to predictive prevention. The approach required more resources initially, but it resulted in better health outcomes and lower costs over time. Security Officer Rick Turner shared his experiences with Federation observers who were studying human emergency management techniques. When humans prepare for emergencies, we don't just plan for the most likely scenarios. We plan for the worst possible scenarios and then plan for scenarios that are even worse than that. The Federation officers found this approach difficult to understand. Their resource allocation models were based on statistical probability and cost efficiency. The human approach seemed to ignore probability calculations in favor of comprehensive preparation. We'd rather be prepared for an emergency that never happens than be unprepared for an emergency that does happen. Rick explained, the cost of over-preparation is always less than the cost of under-preparation when lives are at stake. Supply Coordinator Jennifer Martinez showed Federation logistics officers how the human supply system worked. We don't just bring enough supplies for the immediate emergency. We bring enough supplies for extended operations, population growth, equipment failures, and supply chain disruptions. The Federation observers calculated that the human supply levels were sufficient to support the new Kepler colony for 2 years, without any external resupply. From their perspective, this represented massive resource waste. From the human perspective, it represented reasonable emergency preparedness. Communications Officer Steve Clark demonstrated the new emergency communication systems that had been installed throughout the colony. We now have 7 independent communication networks with different transmission methods and power sources. If one system fails, we have 6 backup systems ready to take over immediately. Director Quanful compiled his observations into a comprehensive report for the Federation Council. His conclusion was that human emergency response methods, while resource-intensive, produced superior results and actually saved resources in the long term by preventing future crises. The humans don't just respond to emergencies, Quanful wrote in his report. They eliminate the conditions that create emergencies. This approach requires significant initial investment, but it prevents the need for repeated emergency responses to the same types of problems. The report would eventually lead to major changes in Federation emergency response protocols, but those changes would take years to implement. Meanwhile, New Kepler had become the safest and most advanced colony in the sector, all because the humans believed that no response could be too thorough when lives were at stake. 6 months after the human fleet arrived at New Kepler, the mining colony had become something entirely different from what it had been before the crisis. Jake Morrison stood in his office looking out at a settlement that now resembled a small city more than a simple mining operation. The Obata medical stations gleamed in the sunlight above, while atmospheric processes hummed quietly in the distance, keeping the air clean and safe for all 15,000 residents. Dr. Lisa Carter walked into Jake's office carrying a medical report that would have been impossible to compile before the human intervention. Jake, we just completed our 6-month health assessment for the entire colony. We haven't had a single preventable death since the humans arrived, and we've actually cured diseases that we didn't even know existed. The transformation went far beyond medical care. Chief Engineer Linda Thompson supervised a colony infrastructure that was now more advanced than most planetary capitals in the Federation. The power systems alone could supply energy for a population 5 times larger than New Kepler's current size, and the redundant safety systems made major accidents virtually impossible. The Federation Council has been sending delegations here every month, Jake told Lisa. They want to understand how we achieved this level of development so quickly. What Jake didn't mention was that the Federation wasn't the only organization studying New Kepler. Representatives from dozens of species had visited the colony to observe human emergency response methods in action. The mining operation had become an unintentional demonstration of human crisis management philosophy. Captain Helen Brooks remained in command of the 3rd Colonial Fleet, which had evolved from an emergency response force into a permanent humanitarian task force. The USS Defender and her accompanying ships now served as a rapid response unit for the entire sector, ready to deploy to any crisis within 3 days travel time. We've responded to 18 emergency situations since arriving at New Kepler, Captain Brooks reported to Admiral Tucker during their monthly status meeting. Everything from natural disasters to equipment failures to medical outbreaks. In every case, we've been able to provide comprehensive solutions that prevent the same problems from recurring. The success of the New Kepler response had changed how the Federation approached emergency management. Director Quanful-S report had convinced the Federation Council that human methods, while expensive initially, actually saved resources by preventing future crises. They had begun requesting human assistance for major emergencies throughout Federation space. Commander Patricia Hill supervised the permanent rapid response depot that had been established in the New Kepler system. Her facility could coordinate emergency responses for colonies within a 50 light-year radius and maintain supply reserves for populations totaling over 1 million people. We're not just responding to emergencies anymore, Patricia explained to a group of visiting Federation officers. We're teaching other species how to prevent emergencies from happening in the first place. The educational aspect of the human presence had become almost as important as the emergency response capabilities. Maintenance Chief LeVar Green conducted regular training sessions for colonial engineers throughout the sector, teaching them how to design redundant systems and identify potential failure points before they became critical problems. Dr. Amy Collins had transformed the orbital medical station into a regional medical center that served colonies across 3 star systems. Patients traveled from hundreds of light years away to receive treatment that wasn't available anywhere else in Federation space. Medical Officer Dr. Kevin Ross reported 0 treatment failures and a patient satisfaction rate that exceeded Federation standards by significant margins. We're not just treating diseases, Dr. Collins explained to a conference of Federation medical officers. We're preventing diseases by identifying risk factors and implementing preventive care programs. It's much easier to keep people healthy than to cure them after they become sick. The conference was one of many educational events that had grown out of the new Kepler response. The Federation had realized that human methods could be adapted to their own operations, but it required fundamental changes in how they thought about resource allocation and crisis management. Mining foreman Carl White supervised extraction operations that were now the most efficient and safest in the sector. The human engineers had redesigned the mining equipment to include multiple safety systems and automated monitoring that could detect and prevent accidents before they occurred. We haven't had a single mining accident in 6 months, Carl reported to the Colonial Administration. Our production rates have actually increased because we don't lose time dealing with equipment failures and safety incidents. The success story of New Kepler had reached Earth, where Admiral Ben Tucker was using it as a model for colonial crisis response doctrine. The new protocols established clear guidelines for emergency response that ensured no human colony would ever face a crisis without overwhelming support. When humans receive a call for help, we don't send what you ask for, Admiral Tucker explained to a gathering of human colonial administrators. We send what you need, what you might need, and what you'll need if everything goes wrong. Because in space, there are no second chances. The doctrine had been tested multiple times since New Kepler, and the results consistently showed that comprehensive responses prevented escalation of crises and eliminated the need for follow-up missions. What seemed like overkill to other species had proven to be the most efficient approach to emergency management. Supply Coordinator Jennifer Martinez managed logistics for the entire sector from her position at New Kepler. The colony had become a distribution hub for emergency supplies, medical equipment, and technical expertise that served dozens of other settlements. We maintain enough supplies to handle simultaneous emergencies at every colony within 30 light years, Jennifer explained to Federation logistics officers who were studying human supply chain management. It seems excessive until you need it, and then it seems essential. Colony Communications Officer Steve Clark coordinated the emergency communication network that connected all human colonies in the sector. The system included redundant transmission methods and automatic relay stations that ensured no colony could become isolated during a crisis. The final demonstration of human emergency response philosophy came when Captain Brooks received another distress call, this time from a mining accident in a system 3 days away. Her response was immediate and comprehensive, deploying medical ships, rescue vessels, engineering support, and supply haulers without waiting to assess the scope of the emergency. Deploy the entire medical wing, Captain Brooks ordered. If they're calling for bandages, they'll probably need surgeons. If they need surgeons, they'll need hospitals. And if they need hospitals, they'll need us to make sure they never need to call again. The aliens aboard her ship no longer questioned these orders. Commander Veltar, who had joined the Human Task Force as a Federation liaison officer, had learned to appreciate the human approach to crisis management. The humans taught us that prevention is always cheaper than reaction, Veltar reported to his superiors. Their methods seem excessive at first, but they eliminate problems instead of just treating symptoms. Dr. Trenvik had become a permanent member of Dr. Collins' medical team and was helping to train Federation medical officers in human diagnostic techniques. The human medical philosophy is simple, he explained to his former colleagues. Solve the problem completely the first time, so you never have to solve it again. As the human fleet departed for their next emergency response, Jake Morrison watched from his office window and reflected on how much had changed since that first distress call 6 months ago. New Kepler was no longer just a mining colony struggling to survive. It had become a model of what human crisis management could accomplish when applied with determination and unlimited resources. The lesson had spread throughout the galaxy. When humans promised help, they delivered not just assistance, but assurance that the problem would never recur. Other species had learned that human overkill wasn't a flaw in their planning. It was wisdom earned through bitter experience and applied with overwhelming generosity.